As the morning sun rose on 1175, Saladin looked at the walled city of Aleppo from a nearby hill. The attack by the assassins on his life the night before had left him perplexed. He had underestimated the shrewdness of Gumushtigin. Saladin could not imagine that Gumushtigin would hire assassins to kill him. The assassins were a secret group fortifying themselves in the dense mountains of Syria, and they were famous for targeted killings of political personnel of high power in both the Muslim and Crusader ranks. Ideologically, they followed the Shia sect, and thus they did not like Saladin for abolishing the Fatimid Caliphate. So it was very easy for Gumushtigin to convince the assassins' leader, Rashid ad-Din Sinan, to attack Saladin. On top of that, more news had recently come to Saladin that the Crusaders, under the command of Raymond of Tripoli, were gathering forces and raiding the borders of Saladin's Syrian territory. It was rumored that Gumushtigin had a hand in that as well. All the pieces of the puzzle are now falling into place. Saladin could see how treacherous Gumushtigin had been. He looked at the citadel of Aleppo. He realized how far away he was from gaining total control of Syria. The capture of Aleppo seemed like a dream now. Saladin had to respond immediately against the threat by the Crusaders. He couldn't risk his life and the loss of his army to continue the siege on a heavily fortified city like Aleppo. In this round, Gumushtigin had won. Saladin lifted the siege and took his army back to Damascus. From there, he sent forces to deter the raiding Crusaders. Saladin's recent momentum in Syria caused a lot of jealousy in the Zengid leadership. The emerging leader of the Zengids, Saif al-Din, was a cousin of Nuruddin, so he got the support of Princess Salih and Gumushtigin. Saif al-Din soon united the quarreling Zengid emirs and solidified his position on a vast territory, including Mosul and Aleppo. To weaken the position of Saladin in Syria, they launched a massive propaganda campaign stating that Saladin had forgotten his responsibility of freeing Jerusalem from the Crusaders. Saladin's reputation in Syria as a warrior of the Holy War was heavily damaged because of this, and was under heavy pressure to take action. But his army was not yet strong enough to recapture Jerusalem. So he devised another plan. Saladin strengthened his forces in the cities of Homs and Hama in Syria, and from there he could launch skirmishes in the border territories of the Crusader states. These skirmishes were quite successful, and in many cases, drove Crusaders to withdraw. These victories worked as a checkmate for Saladin against the Zengid propaganda. Saladin's popularity soared among the Syrians as never before. In the following weeks, the political and territorial conflict between the Zengids and the Ayyubids became so intensified that there was no way to avoid war. The armies met near Hama in March 1175. Saladin was vastly outnumbered and had no intention of fighting his fellow Muslims. So Saladin proposed handing over Homs and Hama to the Zengids and in return asked acknowledgement as a ruler of Damascus on behalf of Prince As-Salih. But the Zengids, led by Saif al-Din, were unmoved. Their reply was, "Surrender all lands in Syria and return to Egypt." The negotiation failed and the confrontation was unavoidable. Saladin's military skills and experiences had been greatly boosted by his recent military campaigns. This was reflected in how he arranged his forces to face the stronger opponent. He placed his army at the horns of Hama, hills by the gorge of Orontes River. As soon as the Zengids attacked, they found themselves fighting the battle uphill and pinned by the river at one side. The Zengids' numerical advantage was nullified. Saladin launched a strong counterattack with his most veteran soldiers, immediately collapsing one wing of the Zengid army. Another wing followed shortly thereafter. The Zengids were surrounded from three sides and were thrashed. Another victory for Saladin. Through tactics and determination, Saladin would now be able to force the Zengids into a truce. The Zengids conceded that Saladin should keep his territories in Syria, but the prince would still be in Aleppo under Saif al-Din's guardianship. Finally, peace among the Muslims in Syria had begun. The victory against the Zengids was a crucial development in Saladin's political career. After the victory, Saladin was acknowledged by the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad as Sultan of Egypt and Syria. As sovereign king, he no longer needed the patronage of the Zengid prince. Both in Cairo and in Damascus, coins were being minted with his official titles, and the Friday prayer sermon in the mosques started mentioning him as the sole ruler, omitting the name of As-Salih. This was a decisive move. Officially, Saladin was no longer a part of the Zengid dynasty, but his good fortune didn't last long. During the summer of 1175, a bad drought made the continuation of fighting with the Crusaders an impossibility. The Crusaders were also hit by the same situation, so they made peace with Saladin and there was a pause on ongoing conflicts. Saladin could take a break from military campaigns and focus on the administrations of his vast empire that included Egypt, Yemen, Hejaz, consisting of Mecca and Medina and Syria. Hardly a year had passed. Political turmoil returned in Syria. Saif al-Din started looking for trouble in order to fight Saladin and to gain his territories. So Saladin gathered his forces and marched northwards from Damascus towards Aleppo. On the way, in a place called Tel al-Sultan, he encountered the army of Saif al-Din. Saladin's army was exhausted by their march, but the general lack of leadership and military skills among the Zengid leaders caused a delay in initiating the fight. This gave the Ayyubid army an unexpected opportunity to rest and regain their strength. When the fighting finally began the following day, battle-hardened Saladin took full advantage of the incompetence of the Zengid leaders. As soon as the wings of both armies met one another, Saladin charged forward at the center. The Zengid soldiers became panicked by this surprising maneuver and failed to keep their formation. The Zengids were decimated and Saif al-Din narrowly escaped. The whole Zengid war camp, including horses, armors, arms, and baggage trains, were captured by the Ayyubids. All the captured riches were distributed among the soldiers. Saladin kept nothing for himself, a custom that Saladin followed in every battle of his life. Saif al-Din fled to Aleppo. After the battle, Saladin moved north, capturing more towns in northern Syria from the Zengid command. Eventually he reached the Aleppo region and laid siege to the castle of Azaz, a formidable and strategically important site. One night during the siege, Saladin was having a discussion with his emirs inside his tent. A man dressed in black suddenly entered the tent and stabbed Saladin in the head with a knife. Fortunately, Saladin had been wearing a chainmail hood under his turban, and the first blow slipped and only cut his cheek. Saladin grabbed the man's knife hand and started to twist. The assassin tried to strike again at Saladin's neck. The strength and resistance of Saladin were enough to stop the assassin from landing a lethal blow. Still, the attacker's knife was able to cut through the leather armor on Saladin's shoulder and inflicted a wound. By this time, the emirs in the tent had fully realized what was going on and came forward to rescue their sultan. The assassin was struck down by them. While all of this was going on, a second and third assassin rushed into the tent and started attacking the emirs. But the chaos and the screaming had alerted the guards. They came running and killed the assassins. Saladin's wounds were not severe, but he was profoundly shaken. He realized how serious of a threat the assassins had become. He immediately took precautions and raised guards around the camp to prevent any intruders from entering unnoticed. After a month of siege, the castle of Azaz fell. Now Aleppo was completely surrounded. Saladin did not want to launch a full-fledged attack and destroy the city. This would cause a lot of bloodshed on both sides, and Saladin did not think it would be wise to prolong the campaign against his fellow Muslims unnecessarily. So when the Zengids in Aleppo offered a truce and proposed more territorial control to Saladin, he accepted their offer. The whole of northern Syria came under the Ayyubid dynasty, except Aleppo. Now came time to settle scores with the assassins. Saladin launched a campaign into the territories occupied by the assassins. Soon he reached the castle of Masyaf, which belonged to the assassins' leader himself, Rashid ad-Din Sinan. Saladin laid siege to the castle. Day after day, Saladin sent his army to occupy the castle. Every time the assassins resisted fiercely. The siege became long and bloody. But Saladin was relentless, wanting to see the end of it. So the fight continued. Finally, the assassins gave up and offered to make peace. Saladin now had two choices. He could either accept the peace or continue the siege. The castle of Masyaf was a tough defensive site, fortified with walls and towers placed on top of a mountain. Continuing the capture of the castle would mean that Saladin would have to accept great losses and significantly weaken his army. This would give the Crusaders and the Zengids opportunities to make moves against him. After considering these factors, Saladin took the wiser route. He accepted the truce. A treaty was signed. Rashid ad-Din Sinan promised not to attack Saladin ever again and swore his allegiance. Although the assassins were not completely wiped out, Saladin still could neutralize the threat of the assassins. Saladin could turn an enemy into a strength. Finally, the situation in Syria was stable. The Zengids were no longer a threat. The assassins were under control. The Crusaders had stopped their raids. Saladin now had a brief period of peace. He could now finally focus on preparing for his ultimate goal, Jerusalem. He returned to Cairo, focused on the fortification of his territories on different fronts, reorganized his army, and started planning a full-on offensive against the Crusaders to win back Jerusalem. After years of political struggle and bloodshed with his fellow Muslims, Saladin thought now he would be able to achieve his ultimate goal. Little did he know that he would soon have to flee the battlefield, narrowly escaping death. This was Saladin's first major campaign against the Crusaders, and it resulted in the most devastating defeat of his life at the Battle of Montgessard. Stay tuned for next part where we go over one of the hardest battles of Saladin. Like, subscribe and turn on post notifications.